My mother-in-law looked at the family tree my 6-year-old daughter had spent 3 days making, pushed it back across the Christmas table, and said, "Your mom cheated. Children like you don't get to call me Grandma." June's fingers closed around the bent edge of the cardstock. Daniel stopped breathing beside me. I was already getting out of my chair when June pulled one of the old photographs from its paper corners, turned it over, and looked at Marilyn. "Grandma, then why did Uncle Raymond write 'our boy' on Daddy's baby picture?" Walter's fork lowered slowly to his plate. Marilyn's face went completely white, and for the first time since I had married into the Hayes family, she had nothing to say. Before I tell you what happened after that question, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from today. Stay with me, because what June had found in that old photograph changed far more than one Christmas dinner, and the person who thought she could decide who belonged in our family was about to lose that power completely. If you enjoy family stories where the truth eventually catches up with the people who weaponize it, subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end. This happened on Christmas Eve of 2024, a little over a year before I'm telling you about it now. By then, I had been married to Daniel for almost 10 years, which was long enough to know exactly how his mother operated. Marilyn rarely shouted first. She preferred little questions, little corrections, little comments that could be defended later as concern. If you challenged her, she would tilt her head and ask why you were being so sensitive. If you ignored her, she treated your silence as permission to go farther. I had stopped expecting warmth from her years earlier, but I had also stopped chasing it. And I think that bothered her more than any argument ever could. June's gift had seemed harmless enough. 3 days before Christmas, Walter had helped her choose photographs from a box of duplicate family prints he kept in a cabinet. They were old pictures that had never made it into Marilyn's carefully organized albums. June came home with a small stack and announced that she was going to make Grandma the whole family on one paper. I helped her cut dark green cardstock, spell a few names, and arrange the branches so there would be enough room for everyone. Walter had warned her not to glue the original photographs, so we used paper photo corners instead. June handled the pictures herself, sliding them in and out while she decided where everybody belonged. I never read the backs because I had no reason to. To me, they were old family photographs. To June, they were pieces of a puzzle she was proud to solve. One of them showed Marilyn when she was much younger, sitting in a hospital chair with a newborn Daniel bundled against her chest. June recognized Daniel because Walter had told her it was Daddy as a baby. She also recognized Raymond's name because Walter had shown her several older pictures of himself with his younger brother. Raymond had been dead for years, and June knew him only as Uncle Raymond, another face from family stories. Sometime while she was working on the card, she had taken the hospital Polaroid out of its corners and read the sentence printed clearly across the back. I didn't know that until Christmas dinner. More importantly, I didn't know that sentence meant anything at all. The dinner itself had been normal by Hayes family standards. Marilyn had corrected the way I sliced the rolls, asked Daniel twice whether June was eating enough, and complained that we no longer let June sleep over at their house. I ignored the first 2 comments and answered the third one exactly the way I had before. We're keeping overnight visits at home for now. Marilyn pressed her lips together, but Walter changed the subject, and Daniel reached for the potatoes as though that counted as peace. A few months earlier, I had heard Marilyn asking June whether I had dinner with men while Daniel traveled for work. I had stopped that conversation immediately. When she tried something similar again, I ended overnight visits. I hadn't asked permission from Daniel or Marilyn because I didn't need permission to protect my daughter. After dessert, June ran to the living room and came back holding the family tree against her chest. She was glowing. Every branch was crooked in a slightly different way, and one corner had dried glue on it from where she had changed her mind about a paper star. "Grandma, this is for you," she said. "Grandpa helped me find the old pictures." Walter smiled. Daniel leaned closer to look. I watched Marilyn because even then, something about her expression changed before she said a word. Her eyes stopped on the hospital Polaroid. It was only a second, but I saw her thumb pause against the edge of the card. Then she looked at me instead of June. The softness vanished from her face. She pushed the gift back across the table hard enough to buckle one of the paper branches. "No," she said. June blinked. Marilyn continued. Louder now. Your mom cheated. Children like you don't get to call me Grandma. For half a second, nobody moved. My chair scraped against the floor before I was fully aware I had stood. I didn't ask Marilyn what she meant, because I wasn't going to let her turn my daughter's Christmas into a hearing about my marriage. We're leaving, I said. Daniel looked at his mother like he hadn't understood the words. Walter's face had gone rigid. Marilyn crossed her arms and said, "She deserves to understand why." "She is 6, I said. "She does not carry adult accusations." Marilyn gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course that's what you'd say." I could have defended myself. I could have demanded names, dates, proof, anything. Instead, I reached for June's coat hanging over the back of her chair. Whatever Marilyn thought she was doing, she wasn't going to make me stand there pleading innocence while my daughter listened. That would have accepted the role Marilyn had assigned me. I wasn't interested. June looked from me to Marilyn, confused rather than frightened. "What does cheated mean?" "Not here," I said gently. "Get your coat, sweetheart." But June didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the family tree in her hands. She touched the bent branch Marilyn had pushed back, then slid the old hospital Polaroid out of its paper corners. "Grandma?" Marilyn's eyes snapped toward the photograph. June turned it over. "Then why did Uncle Raymond write 'our boy' on Daddy's baby picture?" The silence that followed felt different from the silence after Marilyn's accusation. That first silence had been shock. This one was recognition. Daniel's face emptied. Walter slowly lowered his fork until it touched the plate. Marilyn stared at the back of the photograph as if June had placed something alive on the table. "What did you say?" Daniel asked. June held the picture toward him. "It says, 'Our boy has your eyes, Raymond.' Grandpa said Raymond was his brother." Marilyn reached across the table. "Give me that." I put my hand over the edge of the family tree before she could take it. "Don't." Her eyes shot to mine. "That photograph belongs to this family." "So does my daughter," I said. "At least she did 5 minutes ago." Walter finally spoke. His voice was low enough that everyone stopped moving. "Marilyn, leave it." She looked at him, and that was the moment I knew June had stepped on something much bigger than an old family argument. Marilyn did not usually look frightened of Walter. She usually looked past him, over him, or through him whenever he disagreed with her. That night, she looked directly at him. "Raymond called Daniel our boy all the time," she said quickly. "He was his uncle. He loved him." Daniel took the Polaroid from June, read the back, then turned it over again. "Why are you acting like this?" "I'm not acting like anything. You just tried to take the picture out of her hands." "Because Morgan is turning this into something." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the way June was watching all of us. I didn't know anything was written on that picture. Marilyn stared at me. Convenient. That was enough. I helped June into her coat and picked up the family tree. Daniel was still holding the Polaroid. I looked at him once. "I'm taking June home. You decide where you need to be." I meant it. I wasn't going to beg my husband to choose us in front of his parents. I also wasn't staying in that house another minute, while his mother decided what my child was allowed to call herself. Daniel looked at Walter, then at Marilyn. Finally, he grabbed his coat and followed us outside. June didn't speak until we were halfway home. Christmas lights passed across the car windows in red, white, and green reflections, while Daniel sat rigid behind the wheel. From the back seat, June asked quietly, "Mommy, am I still Grandpa's granddaughter?" My throat tightened, but my answer did not. "Yes, absolutely." Daniel looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Always." "June." She nodded and leaned against the window, still holding the damaged family tree on her lap. I watched her smooth the bent branch with her thumb until it almost lay flat again. At the time, I thought the worst thing Marilyn had done that night was make my daughter question whether she belonged. I hadn't yet understood why Marilyn had reacted to Raymond's name, like someone had opened a locked door behind her. We had been home less than an hour when Daniel's phone rang. Walter's name appeared on the screen. Daniel looked at me before answering, then put the call on speaker. Walter didn't ask whether we had made it home safely, and he didn't apologize for Marilyn. He simply said, "You need to
dinner.
come see
I had
me
passed
And every
Walgreens
time he
3
offered to
times
help,
that month already
Rachel,
on 3
his younger
different
sister,
attempts to reach
would
my
deflect with
grandmother.
phrases like,
Every
"Don't
time
worry,
the door had
Mom's
closed,
got it."
I
Or,
realized
"We're
then
trying to
that my
keep it
parents
small."
had not
He'd
panicked
chalked
at
it
the
up to wedding
diagnosis.
stress.
They
He
had
told
planned
himself
for it.
not to
They
take it
had a script
personally,
ready before
but
Granny
now,
moved in.
seeing it in
They had
writing
told the
final,
hospice staff their version of
unapologetic,
me long
something
before the
inside
first
him
opioid
shifted.
was prescribed.
Ethan didn't respond.
I drove home
He didn't
that
ask
night
why.
and cried in the
He
bathtub
didn't
with the
demand an
water running so
explanation.
the neighbors wouldn't
Instead, he
hear.
stood up,
There was too much sitting between us, and neither of us wanted June waking to the sound of another argument. When she finally wandered upstairs to change out of her pajamas, Daniel followed me into the kitchen and closed the door halfway behind him. He looked exhausted. "I don't believe you cheated," he said. I set down the mug I was holding. "Good, because that isn't the question." His eyebrows pulled together. "Then what is?" I kept my voice low. "Why did your mother think she could say that to our daughter?" Daniel leaned against the counter and rubbed both hands over his face. "She went too far." The phrase irritated me more than I expected. It sounded like something you said when a relative made an inappropriate joke or criticized someone's cooking. She didn't accidentally use the wrong word, Daniel. She told a 6-year-old that her mother betrayed her father and that she wasn't entitled to call her grandmother grandma. He opened his mouth, but I continued before he could retreat into the same language he had used for years. And this didn't start last night. The first incident had happened near the end of September. Daniel had been in Cincinnati for 2 nights for work, and Marilyn had stopped by our house with a bag of clothes she had bought for June. I was in the laundry room when I heard her asking June who had eaten dinner with us the night before. June named me, herself, and our neighbor Claire's teenage daughter, who had dropped off a school fundraiser form. Marilyn kept going. "Does Mommy ever have dinner with anyone else when Daddy travels? Any men from work?" I stepped into the room before June could answer. Marilyn looked at me with that mild expression she used whenever she wanted to pretend a boundary had appeared from nowhere. I said, "You don't question my daughter about my marriage." She laughed and said she had only been making conversation. I told her there were thousands of things she could discuss with a 6-year-old that did not involve investigating her mother. Daniel had spoken to her that night.
I
At
have
least
been an ICU
that
nurse
was
for
what he
8
told me.
years.
He
I know
said Marilyn
exactly
thought
what
I had
1.5
misunderstood,
milligrams per
and I
hour of
told him I
morphine
hadn't.
does to an
He left it there
82-year-old
because I
woman in
believed the
post-op
line
day
had been drawn
2.
clearly enough.
I looked at the
Then,
IV
in
pump.
October, I
I
picked
looked at
June up
Brenda.
from Marilyn's house
Brenda
after dinner
looked at
and
the
heard my
IV
daughter
pump.
asking why
I
Grandma
said
wanted to know
quietly,
whether I locked my
"The way
phone
you
there
talk
on
in a
Daddy."
room with a sleeping patient."
Marilyn tried to brush
Brenda,
that off too.
she's on
I
a
didn't.
1.5
I told her
milligram
there would be
morphine
no
drip.
more overnight
You
visits
can't
for the
notarize
foreseeable
this.
future.
You know you can't.
She said I was punishing
Right
her.
away.
My father
Ethan
in the
just
charcoal
sat there
suit
for a
on the
while,
steps first
phone
back to
face
school.
down on
She
the
had
table,
ignored a
The
direct
purple
letting
heart
the
on his
silence in
lapel.
his apartment
The
stretch
bright
as far as it
Sunday
needed
sun.
to. The stillness
caption
wasn't
never
uncomfortable.
asked
He was
Mama
used
would
to
be
it.
so
He had
proud.
lived most of his life
She
in
let
that
it sit on
same
the
quiet
screen for
space
10
emotionally,
seconds.
at
She
least
did not
even
say
when the
anything.
rooms around him were
She
full
did
of
not
people who
speak.
shared his last name.
My father
That
looked at
message
the
from his
window.
dad was a
The boundary
ripple,
had
Then
already
Annabelle
but
played
not
the
yet a
voicemail.
wave.
At the
Not
time,
yet.
My grandmother's
I thought
voice
Ethan
came
had
out of the
learned
conference
early
room
that
speakers
being
and filled the
quiet
room
was
the way it
easier
filled
than
the
being
dining.
and I was not sacrificing June's comfort to keep Marilyn happy. What I failed to see was that I had treated Marilyn's behavior as something Daniel could contain on his side of the family. I thought I could set the rule, let him manage his mother, and move on. I know now that silence inside a marriage does not stay neatly on one person's side. That Christmas morning, Daniel pulled out his phone and opened the text thread with his mother. He scrolled back to October. Most of what she had written sounded petty rather than dangerous.
She did not ask how
She
I
can't
was.
keep June from
She
me.
said,
A few days
"Lily,
later,
you
if
embarrassed
Morgan
Mom
wants
in
to
front
play
of a
games with
hospital
family,
nurse.
I can play
She'll
too."
never forgive you.
Daniel had
Just
replied.
stay away.
"Mom, stop.
It's better for
Morgan isn't
everyone."
playing games."
I did not
Then the
call my
conversation
sister
shifted
again
to
for
something else.
26 months.
There was no follow-up,
In the summer of
no call where he
2024,
insisted
Cassandra
she explain what
texted
she
me from a
meant,
coffee shop
no
in
moment
Greer.
where he told her
"Lily,
the subject was closed.
Granny moved into Mom and
I looked
Dad's
at
house
her.
last week.
Did you ever ask
They're
what
saying
I
it's
can
just
play
until
too?"
she gets
meant?
stronger."
He stared at
She's
We
me.
not
all
going
agreed
back
you're
to
not
Travelers.
welcome.
No, I didn't need to yell at him. His face already told me he understood the problem. "You thought if you didn't engage, she'd calm down," I said. He nodded. "Usually she does." I almost corrected him, then stopped. Marilyn did not usually calm down. She usually changed tactics. That was different. Daniel sank into one of the kitchen chairs and looked toward the hallway, to make sure June wasn't coming down. I should have pushed harder.
I packed my
sat
evidence.
across
It's not
folder.
healthy.
I
I
remember
drove
the temperature was surprised by how
135
quickly
miles.
I
I
studied
remember
behaving.
Granny in the
I
doorway with a
texted
hand
Sophia
cutter
from the parking lot
not looking at her
8:52.
daughter.
I
Not
also
looking at
wasn't
me.
interested in making him
Walking
move
past
fast
with the
his
platter
mother
to
had
the
been
table
here
as
too.
if the room had been
And I
silent.
stopped assuming
See,
this
she
was
knew.
yours to manage alone.
She had
At
known.
8:58,
I walked into Sterling Hall 2009. My grandfather Henry died of complications. My sister was
from
already
Agent
at the
Orange
table with
exposure
our family
that the
attorney.
VA
Spent
Harlow
35
knew
years.
her
The
arguing
committee
about
was
doing this.
assembling on the other.
That was the question I had been trying not to ask since the night before. The Polaroid was now in a kitchen drawer where June wouldn't find us staring at it. I had read the inscription twice after she went to sleep. Our boy has your eyes, Raymond. It could still have meant something innocent. Families used possessive language casually all the time, but Marilyn's face at the table had not looked casual. I answered too quickly. Do you think Raymond was your biological father? Daniel's entire expression changed. He stood so abruptly the chair legs scraped against the floor. Can everyone stop deciding what I'm ready to hear for 5 minutes? The words hit harder because they were fair. I had been so focused on getting ahead of whatever Marilyn might do next that I had started treating Daniel's history like another problem to solve. I stood too, but I did not follow him when he moved toward the window. You're right, I said. I pushed. He stayed quiet. Tell me what you want to ask first. It took him nearly a minute to answer. I want to know who Raymond was to my mother. That's it. First question. I nodded. Then that's the first question. He turned back toward me, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. And I want you there when I ask Dad. That surprised me. I had assumed the conversation belonged to the two of them. Are you sure? He gave me a tired look. After last night, I don't want anyone telling me later that I remembered something wrong. Walter called again shortly after noon. Daniel answered normally this time, with me beside him, but not on speaker until he asked his father if I could listen. Walter agreed without hesitation. His voice sounded rough, as though he had slept even less than we had. They arranged for us to come over the next morning. Marilyn, he said, would not be there. He did not explain where she was going, and Daniel did not ask. Before ending the call, Walter went quiet for a moment, then said, There are things about Raymond your mother never wanted you to know. Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. I watched him absorb the words without interrupting. Whatever had been written on the back of that photograph was no longer just an awkward sentence from an uncle. Walter was telling us there had been a secret, and Marilyn had spent years making sure her son never saw it. The next morning, Daniel barely touched breakfast. June was still on winter break, so a close friend of mine took her for a few hours to build a gingerbread house with her kids while we drove to Walter and Marilyn's place. The roads were clear, but the sky had that flat Ohio winter gray that made everything look colder than it was. Daniel drove with both hands locked around the steering wheel. I didn't fill the silence. The night before, he had told me exactly what he wanted to ask first, and I had promised myself I would not turn his family history into a problem I needed solved faster than he could absorb it. Walter opened the door before we knocked. He looked older than he had on Christmas Eve, though barely 2 days had passed. The decorations were still up, the wreath still hung over the fireplace, and Marilyn's silver serving dishes were still stacked on the sideboard as if the holiday had simply been interrupted. Walter led us into the den instead of the dining room. I noticed Marilyn's coat was gone from the hook near the garage door. Daniel noticed too. Where is she? He asked. Walter sat down slowly. With your aunt for the morning, I asked her to give us some time. Daniel did not look relieved. Then tell me about Raymond. Walter looked at me first, not as if he wanted me gone, but as if he was confirming I understood what kind of conversation this was going to be. I said nothing. Daniel had asked me to be there. That was enough. Walter folded his hands and said, Your mother and I were in bad shape in 1983, worse than you ever knew. He explained that by the end of June, they had stopped living together. Walter had moved to a relative's house in another city while they tried to decide whether their marriage was finished. The separation lasted months. We were not living as husband and wife during that time, he said carefully. Daniel stared at the floor. And Raymond? Walter took a breath. Raymond was around your mother more than I was. He told himself he was helping. She told herself the same thing. Somewhere in there, it became an affair. There was no softness in the way Walter said it, and no attempt to make his brother sound romantic or misunderstood. He betrayed me. So did your mother. I loved them both, and they both knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel finally looked up. How long? Walter shook his head. Long enough that when your mother found out she was pregnant, there wasn't much confusion about the timing. The room went very still. Daniel's voice changed when he asked, "So, Raymond could be my father?" Walter did not hide behind vague language. "That is what your mother told me then." I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. He glanced toward me, then immediately back at Walter, almost as if looking at me for too long might make the moment more real. "And Raymond?" he asked. "What did he say?" Walter rubbed his thumb over one knuckle. He believed the same thing. I felt the urge to ask the next obvious question, but I kept it to myself. Daniel had asked for one answer at a time, and this belonged to him. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees. "Did Raymond ever want me?" Walter's face changed slightly. "That's a harder question than it sounds." Before he could explain, we heard the garage door open. Walter closed his eyes for half a second. Daniel stood. A moment later, Marilyn walked into the den carrying her purse and gloves. She stopped when she saw us, then looked at Walter. "You told me they weren't coming until later." Walter rose from his chair. "I told you I needed the morning." Marilyn ignored him and turned to me. "Of course you came." I almost answered defensively, but the accusation was so predictable that it clarified something for me. She still wanted this to be a story about what I was doing to her, not about what she had said to June or what Daniel had just learned. "Daniel asked me to be here," I said. Marilyn looked at her son. "You should not be discussing this with her." Daniel stared at her. "She's my wife. That doesn't mean every private thing in this family belongs to her." I watched Daniel absorb the irony of that sentence. 2 nights earlier, Marilyn had decided my alleged private betrayal belonged to my 6-year-old daughter. Now she was drawing a line around her own past. Daniel said, "Did you have an affair with Uncle Raymond?" Marilyn's face hardened. "Your father has no right to drag up something we dealt with 40 years ago." Daniel looked at Walter. "That's not an answer," Marilyn snapped. "Yes? Is that what you wanted to hear?" Walter told her to stop, but Marilyn was already moving. "Your father loves telling half a story when it makes him look noble." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What half?" Marilyn looked straight at Walter. "You have no idea what he did after he found out." The sentence landed exactly where she wanted it to.
Then I noticed the
Daniel
woman
turned toward
standing
his
2
father.
feet behind Patty.
I could see new
Light blue
possibilities forming in his
scrubs.
face.
Name
None of them
tag
good.
Brenda Markham,
Until that moment,
RN.
Walter had been the injured
I didn't
husband in the
recognize
story.
her from this floor.
Marilyn's words
She wasn't a
opened another
circulating
door.
nurse.
Had
She
he
wasn't a
threatened
charge
Raymond?
nurse, but
Forced
she
him
had a
out of
notary
town?
stamp in her
Pressured
hand.
Marilyn
A
to
lot of
stay?
South Carolina
Given
nurses
Daniel's
pick up a
origin
notary
for
commission
revenge
for
rather than
$50
protection?
of side income.
I didn't know,
Patty
and I
had
refused
clearly
to
arranged
decide
it ahead
before
of
Walter
time.
spoke.
She had been
Walter's
waiting
voice
for the
stayed controlled.
morphine.
"This is not the way to tell him." Marilyn laughed once. "You mean not the way that lets you choose which parts he hears." Daniel stepped between them. Not physically close enough to threaten either one, but enough to stop them speaking past him. "I'm right here. Stop talking about me like I'm not." Both of them went quiet. He looked at Walter first. "Did you know Mom was pregnant before you took her back?" Walter answered without hesitation. "Yes." Daniel swallowed. "And did you know she believed the baby was Raymond's?" Walter leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, answer me." "I will," Walter said. "But there's more to it than one sentence." Marilyn cut in immediately. "There always is with him. That did it." Daniel stepped back as if the room had suddenly become too small. His face had gone pale, and for the first time since we arrived, I stopped thinking about the secret and started thinking about what this was doing to him. I touched his arm but did not pull him toward the door. "Do you want to leave?" I asked. He looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yes." Walter started to say his name. Daniel held up one hand. "Not now." Walter stopped. There was pain on his face, but he didn't chase us or insist on finishing. "I'll answer when you want me to," he said. Marilyn muttered something about Morgan getting exactly what she wanted, but I didn't respond. I took my coat, Daniel took his, and we walked out before his parents could turn his identity into another argument they were having with each other. We made it to the driveway before Daniel stopped beside the car. He didn't open the door. He just stood there staring back at the house where he had grown up, the house where every Christmas photograph had presented the same neat version of the Hayes family. He knew, Daniel said quietly. I could see it before he even answered. I didn't tell him he was right because I couldn't know what Walter had been thinking. I only said, then decide when you want to
60
hear
years,
him
your
say her
sister will
cursive
be
and hang
dismissed
on
from
to
medical
then
school.
back at
There
the
was the
house.
singer. She will
This
never
time,
become a
Daniel
doctor. There was the
finally got
small
into the
cedar
car.
box. Is
on the
that what
highway.
Lily
Start
would
the
want? She
engine for
called.
several minutes.
The Lily would
important
want
one. Daniel
both
did
of
not
them. She
call
never
me
let me
doctors.
open that one.
She
Lily
said,
would want
"Woke early,
healing. You'll know
made
what to
coffee,
do with the
you
important
stared at
part
her
when the
when
time
comes
comes family
and put it
apart.
face down
By the
both
time I
times.
was a
Drop the
teenager,
complaint.
I had
did
a
not
private
push
theory
back.
that my
Julie
mother
was still
hated
on
this
winter
room.
break,
Your father
and I
hadn't
spent most of
performed
that day doing
Christianity the way
ordinary
some
things
women
because
perform
ordinary
yoga.
was exactly
At
what she
11:23,
wanted.
when
I
the
built
right
a blanket
clothed
fort
me
in the
separate
living
in front of the
room,
right
reheated
people.
leftovers for lunch, and watched a movie she had already seen 3 times. Every so often she checked the family tree on the coffee table, smoothing the bent branch with her fingers. She did not ask about Raymond again, and I did not volunteer adult answers she had never asked for. Daniel drifted in and out of the room, trying to be present while carrying something I could see he had not yet decided how to name. Marilyn called me shortly after noon. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I wanted to know what she wanted before she had time to build another story around my silence. Her voice was controlled. We need to talk without Daniel in the middle. I nearly laughed at the idea that Daniel was somehow the obstacle in a conflict she had created by accusing his wife in front of his daughter. Instead, I asked what she wanted to discuss. Ending this before it gets worse, she said. I told her I would meet her at a coffee shop 10 minutes from our house. I would not go back to her home, and I would not invite her into mine. She hesitated, then agreed. I told Daniel where I was going. He looked uneasy, but did not tell me not to go. Do you want me there? He asked. I considered it, then shook my head. No, she asked to talk to me. I want to hear what she says when she can't use you as an audience. He gave me a look that said he understood exactly what I meant. Before I left, I made one thing clear. I'm not making any decisions about Raymond for you. Daniel nodded. I know. That mattered to me more than it would have a few days earlier. I had already learned that being decisive did not mean deciding everything. Marilyn was sitting near the back of the coffee shop when I arrived, wearing a cream coat and holding a cup she barely touched. She had chosen a table away from the counter. I sat across from her and waited. She started with the word family before she said my name. She said Christmas had gotten out of control, that Walter was dredging up something settled decades ago, and that Daniel was being forced to question his entire childhood because of one photograph. She spoke as if June had marched into dinner carrying evidence she had been trained to deploy. I let her finish. Then I said, "What are you asking me to do?" Marilyn seemed relieved that I had asked so directly. Tell Daniel the photograph proves nothing. Tell him June misunderstood something innocent. Stop encouraging Walter to reopen the past, and tell the family that Christmas was a misunderstanding. I stared at her for a moment. And in return? She sat straighter. I will apologize to June. I will let this ridiculous accusation about you go, and we can all move forward. The phrasing told me everything. My innocence was something she was offering to return to me if I helped protect her secret. You're asking me to lie before you'll admit you lied, I said. I am asking you not to destroy a family over something that happened 40 years ago. You brought infidelity into Christmas dinner, not me. Her mouth tightened. Because I had concerns. What concerns? She started listing vague things. I traveled for work sometimes. I was private. June did not look exactly like Daniel at the same age. I asked her for one name, one date, one message, one person who had ever seen me with someone else. She had none. Every answer slid back toward intuition and character. I know what distance looks like, she said. I know what women do when they start pulling a man away from his family. I leaned back. Was Raymond Daniel's father? The question changed her face, not dramatically. Marilyn was too practiced for that, but her fingers stopped moving around the cup. That has nothing to do with you. It has something to do with Daniel. That is between me, Walter, and my son. Then why are you asking me to lie about it? Her eyes sharpened. Because you don't understand what one mistake can cost a woman. For a second, I saw something underneath the anger. Not innocence. Fear, shame, maybe. Something old enough that she had built half her personality around keeping it buried. I did not need to diagnose her to recognize the contradiction. Then you should have been the last person on earth to accuse another woman without proof. Marilyn looked away toward the window. Outside, the parking lot was wet and gray, the kind of winter afternoon that made everything look unfinished. You think this is about you being some victim, she said. You took June away from me. There it was. Not Daniel. Not fidelity. June. I stopped overnight visits after you questioned my daughter about my marriage. You punished me. I changed access because you ignored a boundary. She is my granddaughter. She is my daughter. Marilyn leaned forward. You walked into this family and decided you could rewrite how everything works. No, I decided you could not use my child to investigate me. I was worried. You were angry. She opened her mouth, then closed it. That pause mattered more than a confession would have. I had watched Marilyn defend herself for years. She was never short of words, unless the honest answer was worse than silence. I asked again, calmly, "What evidence did you have that I cheated?" She said, "I know your type." That was not evidence. It was permission she had given herself. When I stood to leave, Marilyn said, "Walter has a letter." I stopped. She watched me closely, measuring whether she had finally found something that would make me chase the secret. He has kept it all these years, one old letter like a weapon. I stayed standing. If it belongs to Walter, Walter decides what happens to it. Marilyn looked almost disappointed. I think she expected me to demand to see it, which would have made it easier to describe me as the person tearing open her past. I picked up my coat. "I'm not here to excavate your marriage. I'm here because you told my daughter I cheated." As I turned away, she said, "Walter knew before Daniel was born." I looked back. She folded her arms. "Ask him why he stayed." I drove home with that sentence in my head, but I did not call Walter. I had promised Daniel I would not move his history ahead of him. When I walked inside, he was at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him. June was upstairs in her room, and the house was quiet. Daniel looked up. "How bad was it?" "She wants me to tell you the picture meant nothing, call Christmas a misunderstanding, and stop asking questions." He gave a bitter little laugh. "In exchange for what?" "An apology to June and permission for me to stop being a cheater." His expression hardened. "Of course." I sat across from him and told him the rest, including Marilyn's comment about the letter. Then I repeated exactly what she had said before I left. "She said Walter knew before you were born."
Too.
Daniel did
But
not
Granny
answer
knew the
immediately.
difference.
Instead,
Lily
he
said,
picked up his
on the
phone and
evening
began
of
to
April
April
7th, the
She
night
said it
before
the
the
way she
hearing,
said everything
Juliet
important.
called me.
Sent
Slow.
that
Her voice was
afternoon.
broken,
So he had
but
not
practiced.
requested.
And once.
Maybe June
Elizabeth,
needed to
she
hear
did
what
not
kind of
lead
mother she
herself.
has.
I will lose
If
everything.
you weren't
paying attention. I will lose Yale. The lesson
time
I will
moved on
lose my
without you.
future.
Over
Over
the
the
next
next
23
years walked me
old,
through
after
what
seeing
was
what
in
the
the
words
cedar
had
box
done.
on the table. I said,
After
and
knowing
what
she
would
had
one
pride
day
in
be?
my
You did
heart
not
about
make
the
us on the
mistake,
high
questioned
shelf.
whether
You
she
wrote
still
5,000
belonged.
There were
Words
11
about
letters
not
my
knowing
grandfather
Daniel
Henry
lessons
had
in
written.
6 hours
I
total.
unfolded
It was
it.
something
Lily,
colder,
pencil, call
a
this a
justification
child
after
holding the hand of a
damage.
woman
For
in
14
drugs.
days,
I had not been
both
ready.
of them
She
looking
still
at each
For
other was
14
right to
days,
tell
I
her.
had been
On
the
the
daughter
back,
who still
in
hoped her
shaky
mother
pencil
would
would
say
say
something
the
true.
message,
For when
then
you
to the
my
dark
mother had
screen
just
when you
answered
meant
the
to
question
phone.
for age 9. I
For
set
the
the
first
alarm. I
time,
took a
it's a small
photograph
phone
of it
call.
where it lay. Tomorrow I would drive 100 miles south on I put the original in the inner pocket of my Augusta Road in Greenville. I went downstairs. I would meet a woman my grandmother had been sitting across from. Juliet had been notified by the Yale committee on
with one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. I stayed quiet while he asked his father to come to our house. Walter did not ask why. He only said he would be there in 40 minutes. When Daniel ended the call, he looked toward the stairs where June was still asleep and said, "I want you in the room." I asked if he was sure, because I meant it. After pushing too hard a few days earlier, I had stopped assuming that being his wife gave me ownership over every answer. "I'm sure," he said. "I don't want pieces of this coming through other people anymore." Walter arrived without Marilyn. He had not shaved, and his coat was buttoned wrong at the bottom, 2 small details I noticed because they were unlike him. Daniel let him in and led him to the dining table. No one touched the coffee I poured. Walter sat across from his son, and for several seconds the only sound in the room was the heating vent kicking on. Daniel finally said, "I'm ready. I need you to
Marilyn,
tell me
we
exactly."
all
So my
agreed you're
sister
not
could
welcome
come.
at the wedding.
3 days
No
later, the
punctuation,
hospice
no
coordinator
explanation.
from interim health
Just that
care in
smug little
Greenville
dash
called me.
she always
He said
used
the
in
lawyer
place of a
was
period.
Southern,
Ethan
careful.
stared at the
Mrs.
message,
Slater,
unsure
your
if his
parents
eyes
have
were playing
indicated
tricks
that
on
for the
him.
patient's
He
emotional
read it again.
stability,
Then
certain
again.
family
The
members
words
should
didn't
not
change.
visit
It
unannounced.
wasn't entirely a
I'm
shock,
so
though.
sorry.
The
Your
signs
mother
had
and
been
I
more
family
subtle,
decision we have to
accumulating over
respect.
months. He hadn't
I
been
sat
included in the
parking
group
lot of
photo
Walgreens
planning,
with the call
hadn't
on the
received an
dashboard
invite to
speaker.
the engagement.
Daniel stared at him without moving. Walter continued. She became involved with Raymond while we were separated. In October, she called me and said she was pregnant. She told me the baby was Raymond's. Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She told you that directly? Yes. And Raymond believed it too? Yes. Walter did not call it proof. He did not pretend there had been a test. He explained that the timing was clear enough to all three of them. Marilyn had been with Raymond during the conception window, and Walter had been living somewhere else. Raymond knew about the pregnancy. Marilyn knew who she believed the father was. Walter knew what she had told him. That was the truth they had lived with for 40 years. Daniel looked down at the wood grain between his hands. So you knew before I was born? Yes. There was no dramatic pause in Walter's answer. That almost made it harder. Daniel had spent several days circling the possibility that his father might have discovered the truth years later. Instead, the man who had raised him had known before he ever held him. Daniel leaned back and let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was nothing amused in it. Then why did you stay? Walter looked at me for half a second, then back at Daniel. I almost didn't. He told us that when Marilyn first confessed, he was furious enough to think the marriage was over permanently. Raymond had betrayed him too, and that wound was different.
For anything else in your family, I replied with one sentence. Anything physical, actually connected to Lily. Call Grandma's lawyer, and I knew who she really trusted. I just did not know where it was yet. It wasn't my lawyer who called. I called, it was there at night. His voice, I had not called her in 4 months. We need to talk. Nervous, right? The way she always picked up when she did not recognize the number on the screen. They had no idea that every cruel thing they did in that hospice room. I had been watching them. I need to ask you something. My name is Lily Slater in person. 33.
Whether I was angry or not. Every week, there was still going to be a baby at the end of it. He said he started asking himself a question that had nothing to do with Marilyn or Raymond. If he returned to the marriage, what would that mean for the child? He could not stay and spend years reminding Daniel that he was evidence of a betrayal. He could not call himself a father only when it felt easy. So I made a decision before you were born, Walter said. If I came back, I came back all the way. Daniel's face had gone still. You chose me before you met me. Walter gave him a tired smile. I chose the job. You made me love you after. That was the first thing anyone said that loosened the air in the room, but only slightly. Daniel looked away toward the kitchen. I could see emotion moving through him. But I would not pretend I knew exactly which part hurt most. The biology, the secrecy, or the fact that the father he had always known had been carrying this knowledge alone. Walter waited until Daniel looked back before continuing. Raymond may have given you his blood. I gave you my word. Daniel's eyes filled, but his voice stayed controlled. You keep saying that like it fixes the fact that you knew something about me that I didn't. Walter absorbed that without defending himself. It doesn't. You decided for me. Yes. You decided I was better off never knowing who my biological father was. Yes. Daniel stood and walked to the window. I stayed where I was. A year earlier, I might have followed him immediately or tried to say something reassuring because silence made me uncomfortable. That morning I understood that Daniel did not need his feelings managed. He needed room to have them. I waited until he turned slightly toward me, then asked, Do you want me here? He looked at me as if the question surprised him. Then he nodded. Yes, please. So I stayed. Daniel returned to the table but did not sit. Did Mom make you promise? Walter looked down. Yes. That answer seemed to hurt Daniel differently. Walter explained that Marilyn had been terrified Daniel would grow up feeling illegitimate or unwanted, especially in a family where people place so much value on bloodlines and appearances. She begged Walter never to tell him. Walter agreed because, at the time, he believed secrecy was another form of protection. He told himself Daniel did not need a biological distinction that would change nothing about who tucked him into bed, taught him to ride a bike, or signed school forms. At first, I honestly thought I was protecting you, Walter said. Later, I think I was also protecting the life we had built. Daniel finally sat again, meaning protecting Mom. Walter did not deny it. Sometimes. That word mattered. It was the first time Walter admitted that his silence had changed purpose over the years. What started as a decision about a baby had become a habit around a marriage. Keep the old secret buried. Avoid reopening the wound. Do not give Daniel a reason to question the family he knew. Do not force Marilyn to face the shame she had spent decades turning into rules for everyone else. I ask one question, and only because Daniel looked at me first. Did Raymond ever try to claim Daniel as his son? Walter shook his head. He said Raymond accepted the arrangement after Daniel was born. He saw Daniel at family gatherings and remained Uncle Raymond until his death years later. Walter did not pretend that made everything simple. He and Raymond were never close again. They rebuilt enough civility for holidays and family events, but not trust. He knew I was raising you, Walter told Daniel. He also knew I would not raise you halfway. Daniel's mouth tightened. Did everyone know except me? No, Walter said immediately. As far as I know, it was
through
your
hospital
mother,
security
Raymond,
under the
and
Internal
me.
Volunteer Coordination
You all
Audit
agreed I
Policy.
should stay ignorant.
She had been at
Walter
Boston
flinched at the
Children's
word, but
24
nodded.
years.
Yes.
They
I
trusted
could
her.
see Daniel
The
wanted
first
to be
file
angry
was my
about it.
patient
That's
navigator log.
Built-in
3,200
intelligence,
total
a
hours across
battery
my
saves
housework.
power,
and updates are automatic.
1,180 of those
Work
hours were
interrupts you.
specifically with Lily Donovan
Dell
and her
Pro.
mother. Bedside reading, translation, family
Daniel
conferences,
loved
hospice
him.
support.
We're Phoenix
After
Energy,
hours
a
visits
family-owned.
him. Both could be true. After a while, Daniel asked, "Was there ever anything written down?" Walter hesitated. That was the first hesitation that felt different from shame. He looked toward the hallway, then back at Daniel. "There is one thing." Daniel's expression sharpened. "What?" "A letter your mother wrote me before you were born." I felt my own attention narrow, but I did not ask to see it. This was Daniel's history before it was mine. Walter continued. "I kept it all these years because I needed to remember exactly what I had forgiven. Not the version either of us told ourselves later. What actually happened?" Daniel sat very still. "What does it say?" Walter reached for his coat but stopped before standing. "Enough that you should read it yourself." Daniel looked at me once, then back at his father. "Then I want to see it." Walter came back the following afternoon with the letter in a narrow manila envelope that looked newer than what was inside it. He
Phone
said
lit
he
up
had
again.
We're going to play
original
3
A
things,
message.
Annabelle said.
This time,
because the
it
paper
wasn't
was
from
tearing
Marilyn.
along the
It wasn't
folds.
from
She started
Rachel.
clip 3.
It wasn't even
My
from one
mother
of the
watched
cousins,
herself.
who
On a
likely had no
wall-mounted
idea what
screen
had just
in a
happened.
stranger's conference
It was
room.
from his
Helped us
father,
Slide her
Thomas
own
Miller.
mother's
The house was
engagement
You
ring
around?
off her own
I think you
mother's
should
finger.
see something.
The
Just
audio
that.
was
Walter
perfectly
sat
7
at the
clear.
end of our
words.
dining table.
No
It's okay,
drama,
Mama.
no
I'm just gonna
emotion.
look at it.
Turning the envelope
Just a
over.
quiet
Don't
flag
worry.
in the wind,
I saved
signaling
mother
that
opened
whatever
her mouth.
Ethan had assumed about the
That letter
boundaries
had
of this
existed
family
That's edited.
fracture.
Daniel, before he had a name, before any of us sitting in that room knew what kind of damage Marilyn would eventually cause by dragging another child into an adult betrayal. Whatever was on those pages belonged to Daniel first. He finally opened the envelope carefully and unfolded 2 sheets of yellowed paper. Marilyn's handwriting was smaller than I expected. Neat and controlled, even in a letter she had apparently written while her marriage was breaking apart. Daniel read silently at first. His expression changed in stages rather than all at once. His jaw tightened, then his eyebrows lifted slightly. Then he sat down. Walter did not ask what he was thinking. I did not either. After several minutes, Daniel put the pages on the table and rubbed both hands over his face. "She says Raymond is my father." Walter nodded. That is what she believed. Daniel looked down at the letter again. "She says you had every right to leave." "Yes. And she says if you stayed, she wouldn't ask you to pretend none of it happened." Walter gave a small, humorless breath. That part did not age particularly well. Daniel kept reading. I could not see the exact lines from where I sat, and I did not try. He eventually pushed the pages toward me. Read it. I asked if he was sure. He nodded, so I picked them up. The letter was not a romantic confession, and it was not an attempt to excuse the affair. Marilyn admitted what she had done. She wrote that Raymond was the father of the baby she was carrying, that Walter had every right to walk away, and that she understood if he never trusted either of them again. The line that stopped me was near the end. She wrote that whatever happened between the adults, the baby should not be made to pay for it. She was terrified, she said, that a child would grow up carrying punishment for something he had not done. I read that paragraph twice. There was something unsettling about seeing a younger Marilyn understand the exact principle she had violated 40 years later. She had once been afraid that an innocent child might be treated as contaminated by an adult's betrayal. Then, at Christmas, she had looked at my 6-year-old daughter and done exactly that. She had not merely forgotten some abstract lesson. She had lived the fear herself. I set the letter down. She knew better. Walter looked at me. He did not defend her. Daniel took the pages back and stared at the line again. She wrote this about me. Yes, Walter said. And then she told June she didn't belong because of something she says Morgan did. Walter's eyes lowered. Yes. Daniel pushed his chair back. I'm calling her. He reached for his phone, but I stopped him with a question rather than a hand. What do you want from the call? He frowned. What do you mean? If she answers, what are you trying to get? An explanation? An apology? Are you asking her to admit something? Or do you just want her to hurt the way you're hurting? His first reaction was irritation. I could see it. Then he looked at the phone in his hand and sat back down. Maybe all of it. That's probably not a good call to make yet. Walter watched us quietly. Daniel did not like being told to wait, but after a moment he nodded. I don't even know what question I'd start with. You don't have to decide today. That was not the answer I would have given a week earlier. Before Christmas, I had treated uncertainty like a problem that needed an immediate plan. But Daniel had already spent his life having other people decide what truth he was ready for and when. I was not going to repeat that pattern simply because I believed my intentions were better. He picked up his phone again, not to call Marilyn, but to open the message thread she had sent after our coffee shop meeting. He scrolled to the text he had shown me. Maybe June needed to hear what kind of mother she has. Walter had not seen it before. Daniel turned the phone toward him. Walter read the message once. Then again. His mouth tightened. When did she send this? The 27th, Daniel said. After Christmas. After she knew what she'd said to June. Walter looked at me. So this wasn't something she regretted immediately. No, Daniel added. She defended it. Walter leaned back in his chair. For several seconds he said nothing. I could see him looking from the phone to the letter. The comparison was obvious enough that none of us needed to manufacture it for him. On one side of the table was a 40-year-old letter from Marilyn begging that an unborn child not pay for adult mistakes. On the other was a current message arguing that a 6-year-old might have needed to hear an unproven accusation about her mother. Walter finally said, She knew what it was to be afraid a child would pay for an adult mistake. Daniel's voice was flat. Apparently that only mattered when the child was hers. Walter did not correct him. His phone rang before anyone could say more. Daniel glanced at the screen. It was his cousin Mark, someone we usually saw a few times a year at larger family gatherings. Daniel started to decline the call, then stopped. He's called twice since yesterday. He answered, and after a few seconds of small talk, Mark asked if he was alone. Daniel looked at me and Walter. Morgan and Dad are here. Is it okay if I put you on speaker? Mark hesitated, then
About
said
to
yes.
fold.
Daniel set
You
the
just
phone
made
on
an
the
enemy
table.
of this family.
Mark's voice came
2
through
weeks
clearly.
later, my father
I need to
emailed
ask
me a
you
single
something, because your mom
paragraph
called me last
informing
night,
me
and
I
none of
was
this
no
sounded
longer
right.
welcome at
Daniel's
family
eyes met
gatherings
mine.
until I apologized
What
for the
did she
scene
say?
at the hospital.
There was a pause on the other
I
end.
did not
She said Morgan
apologize.
cheated. She
I
said you
started
had
no
doubts for a
contact
while,
on a
but didn't want
Tuesday
to
in
say
early
anything because you
September
were
of
trying to protect June.
2023. What
Daniel's
I did not
entire
know,
body went still.
what nobody
Mark
told me
continued,
until 2.5
sounding
years
increasingly
later,
uncomfortable.
was that 2
She made
weeks
it sound
after
like
that.
you told her privately. I didn't want to get in the middle, but then Aunt Lisa said your mom told her something different. Daniel leaned toward the phone. I never told my mother Morgan cheated. Walter's head lifted. Mark exhaled. That's what I thought. What did she tell Lisa? that there was some guy from one of Morgan's work trips. I don't know, she didn't give me a name. I felt a familiar pressure building behind my ribs, but it was not panic anymore. It was clarity. Marilyn was no
on a
longer
faded little
sending
sketch
something
pad.
she
My
had blurted
ID
out.
badge was
It
showed me sitting in a chair. I had pulled my phone out, only holding check the time. On the subject line was my mother's voice, typed in lawyer shaky handwriting, 5 words. Final terms for the return of mom's belongings. Lily, please read in full before responding. I said. I set the cup down before I read the first line. I knew the cadence of her language, even in print. She started crying. She had been a Sunday school teacher at First Baptist Greer for 22
Daniel
cielos.
had confided concerns to her months earlier, and that she had only stayed quiet for June's sake. Daniel read the sentence out loud, once. Then he looked at me. I never said that. I know. Walter reached for the phone, and Daniel handed it to him. He read the message with the same expression he had worn when reading Marilyn's text about June. This time, though, there was something else underneath it. Not confusion. Recognition. Mark was still on speaker. There's another one, he said. She told Lisa she saw messages on Morgan's phone. Daniel's head snapped toward the phone. She has never had access to Morgan's phone. I figured. Daniel thanked him for telling us and ended the call. None of us spoke for several seconds. I looked at the old letter lying open between us, then at the screenshots on Daniel's phone. 40 years separated them. In one, Marilyn had asked not to let a child suffer for adult wrongdoing. In the other, she was inventing wrongdoing so she could justify what she had done to my child. Daniel turned the phone back toward himself and scrolled through Mark's screenshots one more time. She told him I was the source. Walter's voice was quiet. And you weren't. Daniel looked at me, anger finally overtaking shock. I never told her that because I never believed it. The screenshots changed the atmosphere in our house more than the letter had. The letter had been painful, but it belonged to a past none of us could change. The messages were current. Marilyn had taken a lie she invented at Christmas and started building supporting details around it, and she had used Daniel's name to make those details sound legitimate. For the first time since June asked about Raymond, I stopped wondering whether Marilyn would back down once she realized how much damage she had done. She was doing the opposite. She was expanding the damage because losing control of the story frightened her more than losing our trust. Daniel called Mark back and asked him not to forward anything beyond what he had already sent. He also asked for Lisa's number, because he wanted to hear directly what Marilyn had told her, rather than letting the family turn into a chain of secondhand reports. I appreciated that. It would have been easy to turn those screenshots into ammunition and start circulating them ourselves. I was angry enough that some part of me understood the temptation. But June's worst Christmas was not going to become entertainment for relatives who like drama more than truth. Lisa called us that afternoon. Daniel asked if I could stay in the room, and she agreed. Her version was different from Mark's. Marilyn had told her she had personally seen messages on my phone that made her suspicious. Lisa did not remember a name or a date because Marilyn had not given one. She had only said I was too careful with my phone and that she had once glimpsed something from a man while I was visiting. I almost admired the construction of it. It was vague enough to avoid being disproved by one specific fact and detailed enough to sound like evidence when repeated casually. Did she say when this happened? I asked. Lisa hesitated. No. Just that it had been before Christmas. Did she tell you what the message said? No. Did she tell you who the man was? No. Daniel leaned toward the phone. Mom has never had access to Morgan's phone. Not once. Lisa went quiet. That's why I called. It didn't sound right. I thanked her for asking us directly. I did not ask her to correct anyone else. And I did not send her the screenshots Mark had given us. When she offered to tell the rest of the family Marilyn was lying, I said, please don't turn this into a campaign. If she says Daniel was her source, ask Daniel. If she says she saw something on my phone, ask her what she saw. That's enough. After we hung up, Daniel stared at me. You know they're going to talk anyway. I know. You don't want to get ahead of it? No. He rubbed his forehead. Why not? Because then she gets to say I'm organizing everyone against her. I'm not doing that. She made claims. People can ask her to support them. Walter had stayed through the calls, sitting at the far end of the table with the old letter folded back inside its envelope. He looked tired in a different way now. Earlier, he had seemed burdened by what he had hidden. That afternoon, he looked burdened by what Marilyn was doing in real time. "She's always been good at getting the first version out," he said. Daniel looked at him sharply. "You knew she did this?" Walter took a moment before answering. "I knew she liked to define things before anyone else could. That's not what I asked." "No," Walter said. "I did not know she would invent accusations about Morgan." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but not much. "You always let her set the tone." Walter nodded once, too often. 2 days later, another relative contacted
At the wedding, my mom texted
Also,
me,
This time,
they
smug
made her
as ever,
sign something.
no
The
punctuation,
house deed.
just her signature
Joint
dashed
tenancy
like a
with
slap in the
Aunt
face
Patty.
wrapped in
Because
formal
most of
tone.
my
She
travel
told
I
me
didn't
she didn't
reply.
realize
in advance.
I
She
logged
tried
into
to
my
usually
account,
do my hotel
transferred the
meetings and
$6,500
My grandmother had given my
honeymoon
mother
fund
one more
back to
chance
myself,
to behave like a
and
daughter.
canceled the business
My
class
mother
flights I
still
booked
had
under her
bills.
name.
What my mother
No
did not
shouting,
know
no
was that
drama.
the woman whose
Just a
signature
quiet
she had
little
just
click.
collected
By
had
morning,
already
I had 23
11
missed
months
calls.
earlier
That night,
sat
But
in
only
downtown
one
said, "I'm calling her." I did not ask him to wait. "Do you want me here?" "Yes." He put the phone on speaker and called Marilyn. She answered on the third ring, sounding irritated rather than worried. "Daniel, I'm not doing this if Morgan is listening." "She is." "Then call me back when you're alone." "No." There was a pause. I could picture Marilyn deciding which version of herself to use. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm your mother. And Morgan is my wife. That's exactly the problem." Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "Why are you telling people I said Morgan cheated?" "I said you had concerns?" "I never did." "You did, whether you admitted them or not." He looked at me, disbelief turning into anger. "Do not tell me what I believed." Marilyn exhaled sharply. "I was protecting you from having to say it yourself." "Say what?" "You know what." "No, Mom, I don't. Because I never believed Morgan cheated." Her voice hardened. "You're defending her because she has you trained to." Daniel sat straighter. "Stop using my name to attack my wife." I had heard Daniel disagree with his mother before. I had heard him ask her to stop, ask her to calm down, tell her she was being unfair. This was different. He was not trying to lower the temperature. He was drawing a line. Marilyn immediately changed direction. "So now I'm attacking her? After everything she has done to this family?"
Brenda put the stamp
I
back in
spoke
her
for the
bag.
first time.
She walked out of
Name
the
one
room
thing.
without saying a word.
"I'm not discussing this with
My
you."
mother's face
You
turned
already
the color
discussed me
of
with
cooked
half the
beef.
family.
She
Turned
stood
my
up,
granddaughter against
smoothed
me.
her cardigan,
No.
picked
I
up the
told her she
folder,
didn't get
and
to call
motioned
you
me
grandma.
into the hallway with
I said
2
something in
fingers.
anger.
In the
And then
hallway, she
defended
did
it
not
2
raise
days
her
later.
voice.
Daniel picked
My
up
mother
his phone
never
and read
raised her
own
voice in
message back to
public.
her.
She
Maybe
leaned
June
in
needed to
close
hear
enough
what
that
kind
I
of
could
mother
smell
she
her
has.
morning coffee.
Marilyn was quiet.
You
for
don't
several
understand what we're
seconds.
trying to protect her
Finally, she
from.
said,
From what,
twisting
Mom?
my
Bed at
words.
night.
That overly
reading.
formal
She did it
tone
because
she
she was a
used
good
when she
daughter.
wanted to
That was the
sound
She did
above
it on
the
an
chaos
iPad
she
signed
often
into an
created,
Apple ID that
as though she
uploaded
were a
every
school
minute of
principal
footage
handing
as
down a
family
suspension,
iCloud drive
rather
she
than a
had never
mother
logged
cutting
into
out her own
until
son
then.
from a family
She had hung a
milestone.
camera in
The
the
room
room,
felt unusually
and then she
quiet,
had pointed it
as if
at
the air
herself.
itself had paused to
Cassandra
see what he
texted
would do
me on a
next.
Wednesday.
But
She
Ethan
was
didn't
wearing a
move.
camel trench coat.
He didn't
No.
pace. He didn't
This is
write a
what
furious
happens when
email or
everyone
call
loses
anyone.
weight
without losing muscle?
Instead,
Factor
he
got me
opened
there.
a blank
I
document
was
on
tired
his
of all the
laptop
cutting and bulking
and
cycles.
typed,
Every email she had ever
taking
sent
all
me
this
opened
time.
the same way. I thought you
You
had
don't even
Lily.
know what happened between
Your
Morgan
father
and
stayed on
I.
the phone with her
During
for
this
45
thing.
minutes.
Yes, he does.
We're
Look, I
prepared to
told
give
her
back
was
what your
happening.
grandmother
I know that.
left for
I
you.
told her
but
Yale
only
committee.
after you
Marilyn
cut about
was quiet.
Juliet's essay,
Then she
face us
said,
in person,
about the letter
and
Marlo
apologized
had.
on
Everyone
video.
wants to accuse
3
me.
months. She
Then
listened.
everyone
That was
comes
how
here
long
from
my
me
grandmother had
directly.
been
At
in the
the
ground.
Sunday.
She said,
Here.
I scrolled. What
No
do you need me to
whispers,
do?
no
41
screenshots
bullet
telling
points. I told her I would
like
call her
I'm
back. I
some
read them
criminal.
once the way
There
you
was
read a
something
lab
I
report
had
for a
to
patient you don't
On
know
the
yet.
evening
Of
of
March
March
says,
I knew
drug-free
what he was
workplace,
asking without either of
random
us needing to
testing
say
in
it.
effect.
We had
I
spent
had
the
passed
past
my
week
December
refusing
screen
to let
3
June
weeks
become
earlier.
evidence in an
I
adult
called my old
document.
church friend
That did
Bethany
not
on
change
speakerphone
because Marilyn
and
wanted
asked
an
her
audience.
gently
June
what
won't be
people
there,
were
I
saying.
said.
She
Marilyn
paused
snapped.
for a
She
long
is part of
time.
this family.
She said,
She is 6.
Patty says
She
you've
was
been
old enough to
struggling with
repeat what she found.
substances and
She
toxic
asked a question about a
influences.
photograph.
She says
He
they've
turned it
had to
into
set
an
hard
accusation about
boundaries
her
to
mother.
protect Mama.
You're hiding her because you don't want her
Substances
hearing
and
the truth.
toxic influence.
No, I said. I'm keeping her out because she has already heard more than she should have. Daniel backed me immediately. June is not coming. Marilyn tried once more. You don't get to decide that by yourself. Daniel's voice went very calm. We are her parents. Yes, we do. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Walter said, If you want everyone there Sunday, I'll come. Marilyn's tone softened toward him. Good. Then you can finally tell them what Morgan has been doing. Walter answered, I'll tell them what I know. The distinction was small, but Marilyn heard it. Her voice tightened. After everything I've done to keep this family together, you're really going to stand there and let her tear it apart? Walter looked down at the envelope containing the old letter. I won't support a story you cannot keep straight. Marilyn hung up. Daniel left the phone on the table and stared at the blank screen. I could feel the old instinct in me to prepare for battle. Organize the screenshots, write down dates, anticipate every accusation, control every variable. This time I slowed myself down. We did not need a performance. We needed facts and boundaries. We bring what already exists, I said, nothing more. Daniel nodded. Walter folded his hands over the envelope. Your mother will try to make Sunday about the affair. I know, I said. I'm not going to let her make it about whether I deserve to be believed. Daniel looked at me. Then what is it about? I thought of June smoothing the bent branch on her family tree in the back seat after Christmas, asking whether she was still Walter's granddaughter. It's about what she did to our daughter after she had already been told to leave her out of this. By Sunday, Marilyn would have the room she wanted. The difference was that this time, June would not be in it. And Marilyn would not be the only person deciding which version of the truth everyone heard. By Sunday afternoon, June was at my friend's house on the other side of town, decorating cupcakes with her children, and completely unaware that several members of Daniel's family were gathering at Marilyn and Walter's house to argue about whether she belonged in it. That was exactly how I wanted it. Marilyn had already dragged our daughter into one adult conflict. I was not bringing her back into the same room so people could discuss bloodlines, betrayal, or my marriage in front of her. When Daniel and I pulled into the driveway, Walter's car was already there. 2 other relatives had arrived before us. I could see Marilyn moving through the front window, straightening cushions and carrying coffee as though she were preparing for an ordinary family visit. Even after everything that had happened, she still seemed determined to control the room before anyone else entered it. Marilyn greeted us without warmth. She did not ask about June. She looked behind me once, realized our daughter was not coming, and said, I suppose you decided to keep her away again. I took off my coat. We decided not to put her in another adult argument. Daniel stood beside me. June isn't part of this meeting. Marilyn gave him a disappointed look and turned toward the living room without answering. That was another thing I had learned about her. When she could not win a point, she often behaved as though the other person had been too unreasonable to deserve a response. There were only a handful of relatives there, which I appreciated. Mark sat near the fireplace. Lisa was beside him. Another aunt had come because Marilyn had called her directly during the week. Walter sat in his usual chair but did not look comfortable in it. The old manila envelope rested on the side table beside him. Marilyn noticed me looking at it and immediately said, So Walter brought his exhibit. I did not respond. I had not asked him to bring the letter, and I was not going to let her make me responsible for that either. Marilyn stood instead of sitting. I asked everyone here because lies have been spreading through this family. The irony was so obvious that nobody reacted, she continued, saying that an old mistake from her marriage was being weaponized against her, that June had been encouraged to misunderstand a harmless photograph, and that I had been using the incident to turn Daniel and Walter against her. She spoke for several minutes without once mentioning the sentence she had said directly to my daughter. When she finally turned to me, she said, Morgan has behaved secretively for months. She travels without Daniel, and June barely resembles this side of the family. I had reasons to be concerned. I did not defend my entire life. I asked one question. What reason? Marilyn frowned. I just told you. No. You listed things you dislike about me. What evidence did you have that I cheated? She looked around the room. People notice things. What people? I'm not putting other people on trial. Daniel leaned forward. You already put Morgan on trial. Give us one name. Marilyn's expression hardened. She travels for work. So do I, Daniel said. She became secretive. I answered that one. I became private with you after I caught you questioning my 6-year-old about my marriage. Marilyn looked toward Lisa. You see what she does? Every concern becomes an attack. Lisa did not rescue her. You told me you saw messages on Morgan's phone. Marilyn hesitated. I saw enough. What did you see? I asked. She stared at me. I don't remember the exact wording. Who sent it? I don't remember. When? Months ago. Mark shifted in his chair. You told me Daniel was the one who had doubts. Daniel took out his phone. And I never told her that. Marilyn turned toward him. You expressed concerns without saying the words. No, I didn't. You were worried about the way she was pulling away from this family. That is not the same thing as believing my wife cheated. You don't know everything she does when you're not there. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Neither do you. Marilyn looked almost offended by the answer. How can you possibly be sure? Daniel did not look at me before answering. He looked directly at his mother. Because I know my wife. The room went quiet. It was not a legal argument. It was not evidence that would satisfy a court, and it did not need to be. Marilyn had spent days acting
A part
as if
written
our
by
marriage
my
were a
mother.
mystery.
I would have
Only
to
she had
find
the
that one
courage to
myself.
investigate.
The honor committee
Daniel was
process
refusing
began on March
paradise.
4th.
He trusted
I
me.
drafted a formal
More
request and sent it to
importantly, he was
Marlo.
finally willing to
I
say it in
asked the
room
committee
where his
to
mother
compare my
wanted him to
submitted
find
personal
out.
statement from the
Marilyn crossed her arms.
2025 cycle with
This is
Juliet's
exactly
submitted
what she
personal
wanted.
statement from the
You against me.
2024 cycle.
No, Daniel
Specifically, the
said.
paragraphs
This is me refusing
referencing a
to let you
pediatric
speak for me.
oncology patient.
Walter finally stood.
I attached my original
enough.
draft document from
Marilyn
spring
turned toward him.
2020.
Good. Then tell them the rest. Walter's face was tired, but his voice was steady. I will. He told the room what he had already told Daniel and me. He and Marilyn had lived apart through the summer and fall of 1983. Marilyn had become involved with Raymond during that separation. When she became pregnant, she told Walter that Raymond was the father. Walter knew the timing. Raymond knew about the pregnancy. Walter had chosen to return to the marriage and raise Daniel as his son. Nobody interrupted until the aunt near Mark whispered, So Daniel isn't really yours? Walter turned toward her so quickly that she flinched. Don't say that about my son again. The correction landed harder than anything Marilyn had said all afternoon. Walter did not sound defensive or embarrassed. He sounded offended by the premise. Daniel looked down for a moment, and I saw his hand tighten against his knee, whatever anger he still carried about the secret. The man beside us had just made one thing unmistakable in front of everyone. Biology had never reduced Daniel's place in his life. Marilyn's face changed. She had called the meeting to regain control, but Walter's version left her with nowhere comfortable to stand. If blood determined family, Walter's entire life with Daniel contradicted her. If forgiveness mattered, then her treatment of June became even harder to defend. She turned back toward me, because I was still the target she preferred. None of this proves Morgan didn't cheat, Daniel said. You still haven't proved she did. Marilyn looked at Walter. Tell them I had a reason. Tell them she's lying about how this started. Walter did not move. What reason did you have? You know what women can do. The words hung there. Walter stared at her for several seconds, then reached for the manila envelope on the table. I had seen that look on his face before, but I would not pretend I knew exactly what he was thinking. I only knew he had stopped trying to make the moment easier for her. He placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of Marilyn. Read the first paragraph. Her eyes dropped to it. I'm not performing for these people. Then don't perform. Read what you wrote. She reached down and snatched the envelope off the table. This is private. It was private, Walter said. Until you started using another woman's supposed infidelity to justify what you did to a child. Marilyn held the envelope against her chest. Nobody needed her to read the letter aloud. Daniel had already seen it. I had already seen it. Walter had already confirmed what it contained. Her reaction only made the truth harder to dodge. You forgave me, she said to Walter. Yes. Then why are you doing this? Walter's expression barely changed. Because forgiveness was never permission. Marilyn stared at him. He continued. I forgave what you did to me 40 years ago. I never agreed to spend the rest of my life watching you punish other people for it. Her face flushed. After everything I did to keep this family together? Walter looked around the room, then back at her. You didn't keep it together. You kept it afraid. Nobody spoke after that. There was no applause, no dramatic pile-on, no moment where every relative suddenly turned against Marilyn at once. Mark looked uncomfortable. Lisa looked down at her hands. The aunt who had questioned Daniel's place in the family would not meet Walter's eyes. The silence was enough. Marilyn had always controlled family gatherings by deciding which version of events everyone was allowed to repeat. That afternoon, people had heard her version and then watched it collapse under questions she could not answer. Walter picked up his coat from the chair by the door. Marilyn stared at him. What are you doing? I'm leaving. For how long? He paused. I don't know. Her voice rose. You're walking out over something that happened 40 years ago? Walter shook his head. No. I'm walking out because of what you're doing now. He moved toward the door. Marilyn followed him 2 steps. Where are you going? Walter put on his coat and looked back at her. The condo. I need some distance before I decide what comes next. Then he opened the door and left. And for once, Marilyn did not have another version ready before the truth walked out of the house. Walter did not go back to the house that night. He drove to the condo he and Marilyn had owned for years near downtown Columbus, a place they had mostly used when they wanted to stay closer to restaurants, appointments, or events in the city. Nothing about the move was dramatic. He did not hire movers. He did not empty closets. He took 1 suitcase, his medications, a few shirts, and the small leather bag he used for overnight trips. Daniel and I stopped by the next evening because Walter had asked us to bring a charger he had left behind. The condo looked temporary because that was what he intended it to be. His suitcase was still open on a chair. A grocery bag sat on the counter. Walter stood in the middle of the living room and said, I don't know what happens next. I only know I can't go back there and pretend Sunday didn't happen. Daniel nodded, but there was no relief in his face. His parents separating did not feel like a victory to him, and I understood that. Walter had spent 40 years defining himself partly through the decision to stay. Walking out now meant admitting that forgiveness had not solved everything, and Daniel was still trying to understand what that meant for the family he had believed in. I did not tell Walter what he should do. I had no interest in becoming the person Marilyn could later point to and say had pushed him out. Take the time you need, I said. Walter looked at me for a moment, then said, I should have done that sooner. I knew he was not talking about the condo. Marilyn called me the following morning. I almost ignored it, but something told me she was no longer calling to argue facts. Her first sentence proved me right. Is this what you wanted? Her voice was low and controlled, which with Marilyn was usually more dangerous than shouting. I stood in my kitchen while June colored at the breakfast table in the next room. No, I said. What I wanted was for you to leave my daughter out of your hatred for me. My marriage is ending because of you. Your marriage is changing because Walter stopped carrying the consequences of your choices. She inhaled sharply. You think you're very clever? No, I think you're looking for someone else to blame. You brought that letter into this family. I never asked to see it. You encouraged Daniel. He asked questions about his own life. You poisoned Walter against me. He heard your own words. Every path she tried led back to something she had done herself, and I think that was what she hated most. If I had screamed at her, threatened her, exposed the letter publicly, or demanded Walter leave her, she would have had a cleaner story. Instead, I had simply stopped absorbing the consequences for her. Then she changed tactics. Bring June over. I went still. No. Just for an hour. No. Walter would come home if she asked him. For 1 second, I honestly could not believe she had said it. Then I remembered who I was talking to. My daughter isn't bait. She misses her grandfather. Then Walter can see her here. You know what I mean? Yes, I said. That's why the answer is no. Marilyn accused me of enjoying her pain. I did not deny that part of me felt satisfaction watching the rules she had imposed on everyone else finally stop working for her. I would have been lying if I said otherwise. But feeling something and acting on it were not the same thing. I did not bring June over to pressure Walter. I did not call relatives to make sure they knew he had left. I did not send anyone a photograph of Marilyn's old letter. I ended the call when she started repeating herself. Daniel spoke to her later that week with me beside him. He did not put the call on speaker until she agreed, because by then we had both become careful about what belonged to whom. "Mom," he said, "you are not seeing June alone right now." Marilyn immediately objected. "You're punishing me." "No, we're setting conditions. I am her grandmother. That doesn't give you automatic access." Her voice cracked slightly. "So, Morgan wins." Daniel did not react to the word. "This is not about winning. You told my daughter her mother cheated. You told her she didn't get to call you grandma. Then you defended it afterward. Until you can admit exactly what you did without blaming Morgan, there are no unsupervised visits." Marilyn tried to soften it. "I already said I was upset. That is not an apology. What do you expect me to say?" "The truth." She went silent. Daniel continued. "You tell June her mother did not cheat. You tell her you said something false because you were angry. You do not say Morgan forced you, confused you, kept June from you, or made you suspicious. You do not make June responsible for fixing your feelings." Marilyn said, "You sound like her." Daniel looked at me, but his answer was for his mother. "No, I sound like a father." That was the moment I knew something had permanently shifted in him. He was no longer asking Marilyn to be reasonable. He was deciding what happened if she was not. She refused the apology then, not explicitly. Marilyn rarely said no when she could delay instead. She said she needed time, that everyone was emotional, that the family should cool down. Daniel told her to take all the time she wanted. The boundary stayed exactly where it was. The next few months were quieter than I expected. There was no formal announcement that Marilyn was no longer the center of the family. Nobody held a vote. Nobody sent a message saying traditions had changed. They simply changed. Easter moved to Lisa's house because she had more room for the younger kids. A summer barbecue happened at Mark's because he had recently built a patio. By Thanksgiving, the family group planning dinner no longer began with everyone asking Marilyn what time to arrive. People suggested dates and locations as if that had always been normal. The shift was subtle enough that I almost missed how much it mattered. Marilyn's power had never come from a title anyone had officially given her. It came from everyone behaving as though the family only functioned through her. Once people stopped doing that, nothing collapsed. That was the part she had never expected. Walter remained at the condo most of the year. He and Marilyn spoke. Sometimes they had dinner. Sometimes he stayed at the house for an afternoon and left before dark. He never told us every detail, and I did not ask. There was no instant divorce and no dramatic reunion. When Daniel asked once whether Walter planned to go back permanently, Walter said, "I'm not deciding based on who feels sorry first." That was enough. I would be lying if I said I felt only noble things during those months. The first time I walked into a family gathering, and nobody waited for Marilyn to choose the seating, a small, ugly part of me enjoyed it. The first time a relative called Daniel directly, instead of calling Marilyn to ask what Daniel thought, I noticed. I did not celebrate those moments out loud, but I did not pretend I was above them either. What mattered was what I did with that satisfaction. I did not make the wound wider. June asked about Marilyn less often as the months passed. When she did, we answered honestly without giving her adult details. Grandma had said something wrong. Grandma needed time to make it right. Grandpa still loved her. Daddy still loved her. None of that meant June had to fix anything. By late November, almost 11 months after the Christmas dinner that started everything, Daniel received a message from Marilyn while we were cleaning up after dinner. He read it once, then handed me the phone. "I'm ready to tell June the truth about her mother." I looked at Daniel. He did not ask what I wanted him to do. He already knew the answer would be ours together. "Then she says it in front of both of us," I said. Marilyn came to our house the first week of December, almost a year after the Christmas dinner that had changed everything. Daniel and I had agreed on the conditions before she arrived. June would not be left alone with her. There would be no discussion of Raymond, Walter's marriage, or anything else that belonged to adults. Marilyn had one job: correct the lie she had told our daughter. When the doorbell rang, June looked up from the puzzle she was working on at the dining table and asked, "Is Grandma here?" I told her yes. She did not run to the door the way she once would have. That hurt to watch, but I reminded myself that Marilyn had created that distance. it was not my responsibility to erase it for her. Marilyn looked different when Daniel let her in. Not physically older, exactly, but smaller somehow, without the certainty she used to carry into every room. She took off her coat, looked at me, then at Daniel, and asked whether June was ready. I almost answered that the question was whether Marilyn was ready, but I kept it to myself. June came into the living room holding one of her puzzle pieces in her hand. Marilyn smiled at her. "Hi, sweetheart." June gave a cautious little smile back. "Hi." Nobody prompted her to hug Marilyn, and Marilyn, to her credit, did not ask. We sat together in the living room, Daniel beside me and June on the rug near the coffee table. Marilyn clasped her hands so tightly I could see the pressure in her knuckles. For several seconds, she seemed to be searching for a softer version of the truth. I did not help her find one.
At the
Finally,
time,
I texted back.
it had seemed like a small
Cassie,
favor,
Last
use the
one of
family
many.
Apple ID.
He clicked
The
cancel.
old one Aunt Mary
The
Ann
The
page
set
page
up
processed
in
for a
2015.
moment
June looked
before
at Marilyn
confirming the
and
refund,
back at Marilyn.
$3,800
seconds.
deposited back to his
Already on
account
it.
within
That
5 to
That
7
family
business
Apple
days.
ID had been on
He moved
Aunt
on
Mary
to his
Ann's
banking
phone
app,
before she died.
found the transfer
It had
record
been
from
on
3
Walter's.
weeks prior,
It had been on
$6,500 wired
It
to
had been on
Marilyn's
mine.
account, marked
My
as
mother had never
wedding
used
gift
it because
honeymoon
my mother
support.
believed iCloud
He
was a
reversed
place
it.
for criminals.
Never at you. Then why did you say I couldn't call you Grandma? Marilyn swallowed. Because I was angry and I wanted to hurt your mother. I used words that hurt you instead. That was wrong. I had wondered for months whether she would actually say it that plainly. She did not mention the sleepovers. She did not say I had pushed her. She did not say she had only been concerned. For once, she left the blame where it belonged. June looked down at the puzzle piece in her hand, turning it over between her fingers. "So can I call you Grandma?" Marilyn's first instinct was visible. She almost answered immediately. Then she stopped. "Only if you want to." June thought about that for a moment. Okay. There was no dramatic reunion. June did not throw herself into Marilyn's arms. Marilyn did not cry and become a different person in 5 minutes. She stayed for less than an hour. They worked on the puzzle together while Daniel and I remained in the room. When Marilyn left, she asked whether she could see June again before Christmas. Daniel told her we would discuss it. Marilyn nodded. A year earlier, she would have treated that answer as an insult. This time she accepted it. Walter still lived mostly at the condo. By December, he and Marilyn had started having dinner together once or twice a week. But he had not moved home. Daniel once asked him whether that meant they were getting back together. Walter said, "It means we're talking. I'm not making a bigger promise than that." I respected the answer. Their marriage had survived a betrayal 40 years earlier because Walter had decided to stay. That did not mean he owed Marilyn the same decision after discovering what decades of silence had allowed between them. A few nights before Christmas, Walter came over for dinner. June was upstairs showering, and for once the conversation about Raymond happened without urgency. Daniel had spent the year sorting through what the truth meant to him. Some days he was angry that he had been denied it. Other days he seemed almost embarrassed by how little biology had changed the relationship he actually remembered. That night, after we cleared the plates, he finally asked the question I suspected had been sitting in him for months. "Did you ever look at me and see Raymond?" Walter did not lie to make the answer easier. "Sometimes." Daniel's face tightened slightly. Walter continued, "Especially when you were younger, you had some of his expressions." He paused. "Then you'd laugh, argue with me over something ridiculous, or take apart a toaster because you were convinced you could improve it. You'd do something completely like yourself." Daniel gave a small smile. Walter did too. There was still grief between them, but it no longer looked like fear. Christmas that year was at our house. Not because we had announced a new tradition or decided to replace Marilyn. Daniel and I simply invited people, and enough of them said yes. Walter came early to help with dinner. Mark brought dessert. Lisa arrived with her children. Marilyn came for the afternoon and stayed through the meal. She did not direct the seating, correct the menu, or tell anyone when gifts should be opened. Once or twice I saw her begin to do something automatically, then stop herself. I did not reward her for basic restraint, but I noticed it. June disappeared into her room after dessert and returned, carrying the same family tree she had made the year before. The cardstock was softer now, and the branch Marilyn had bent still showed a crease. Months earlier, I had offered to help her make a new one. She refused. "This one is mine," she had said. That afternoon, she spread it across the table and pulled out a roll of clear tape. Walter leaned over her shoulder. "Repair work? It keeps bending here." She taped the crease carefully, then smoothed it with her palm. Some of the labels had loosened, so she started moving them. She had never treated the project like a genealogical chart anyway. To her, it was simply a map of who everyone was to her. She picked up Raymond's label first. "Uncle Raymond goes here, right?" Walter pointed to a branch beside his own. "Right there. He was my brother." June placed the label and pressed it flat. Then she checked Walter's name.
During their courtship, you watched her die. The paragraph your mother handed you. 57. That before they married in 1958. That is a decision there was the sapphire engagement ring she said bought her in Charleston. You don't have to do this tomorrow. There was the Purple Heart he had earned outside the city in 1968. And never spoken of once. I saved the call. There was a family Bible from 11:18. My mother left me a great-great-grandparents written 4 minutes copper plate 12 seconds. Elizabeth, there was a recipe. Listen to me. If you do this tomorrow.
Now she sat quietly, while a 7-year-old decided where Grandma belonged on her own family tree. June looked over the finished card. "Did I put everybody where they belong?" Walter studied it with exaggerated seriousness. "Looks right to me." June grinned and reached for another piece of tape. I watched her smooth the repaired branch until it lay almost flat. The crease was still visible underneath. I was glad she had not covered it completely. What happened to our family had not disappeared because Marilyn apologized. Walter stayed Daniel's father, or Christmas became peaceful again. Walter was still separated. Marilyn still had boundaries around her relationship with June. Daniel still had questions he would probably carry for years. I had also learned something about myself. Setting one boundary and leaving everyone else to deal with the fallout had never been enough. Protecting my family sometimes meant staying in the room, asking the uncomfortable question, and refusing to let someone else define what the problem was. June placed the family tree in the center of the table and ran her hand once over the strip of tape she had added. The paper held. You should never let keeping the peace become an excuse for letting someone mistreat your child, your spouse, or you. A healthy family is built on honesty, accountability, and boundaries that are enforced. If someone lies, manipulates, or uses a child to punish another adult, you do not have to protect their reputation from the consequences of their choices. At the same time, strength does not mean cruelty. You can tell the truth without humiliating people, refuse reconciliation without revenge, and allow forgiveness only when accountability appears. Most importantly, remember that blood alone does not make someone safe, loyal, or worthy of access to your life. Pay attention to actions, not titles. If a boundary is ignored, follow it with a consequence. If trust is broken, require proof of change before restoring it. If this story gave you something to remember, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.